When a violent storm rolled across the mountains of Montana, she thought she was going to spend the night alone, stranded in a remote forest shelter. But just after sunset, something enormous stepped out of the trees, and she found herself face to face with a full-grown grizzly bear. Instead of attacking, the bear curled beside her, silent and soaking wet, as if seeking warmth, not a fight. They survived that night together. Then, the bear disappeared. Months passed. The woman thought it had been a one-time miracle of nature until the bear came back. And what she brought with her left the woman frozen in place, overwhelmed and in tears. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more real, unforgettable animal stories straight to you. It had started as a solo hiking trip, for days across the Sapphire Mountains, off-trail, off-grid. Mara Green had always been the kind of woman who chose solitude over comfort. She didn't run from people exactly, but the quiet spaces between words had always felt more honest than the noise of the city. After a painful divorce and the loss of her younger brother to cancer the previous year, she had taken a long sabbatical from her job at the university. She packed a backpack, grabbed her old trail maps, and went looking for silence in the forest. What she found was something else entirely. The storm had come out of nowhere. Mara had reached the edge of a steep ridge just past midday when she noticed the clouds shifting unnaturally fast. By the time she reached the nearest trail marker, the wind was howling hard enough to bend branches. Rain followed like a wall. Visibility dropped to nothing. She had no choice but to take shelter. There was an old fire lookout cabin she had passed on her way up, barely more than a structure of logs and rusted nails, but with a roof and a door that shut. She ran back toward it, soaked and stumbling. When she pushed open the door, the air inside smelled like mold and pine, but it was dry. She lit a small lantern, laid out her sleeping bag, ate half a protein bar, and waited. The storm grew louder. The roof creaked under the weight of water and wind. Branches slammed against the side of the cabin. Mara curled up by the wall, hugging her knees, the lantern flickering. Then she heard it. Not the storm. Not thunder. A sound outside, heavy, rhythmic, purposeful footsteps. Mara froze. Another step. Then a low, breathy exhale. She reached for her bear spray but didn't uncap it. Then the door creaked open, slowly, as if nudged by something massive and careful. Mara didn't breathe. In the flickering light, she saw it, a full-grown grizzly bear, wet and glistening, stepping halfway into the doorway. For a second, time collapsed. She didn't scream. She didn't move. And the bear didn't charge. It simply looked at Mara, head slightly tilted, then stepped inside slowly, with surprising grace, and curled up in the far corner of the cabin. The next 2 hours passed in surreal silence. Mara watched the bear. The bear, it seemed, watched the storm. Neither of them made a sound. Outside, trees snapped. Wind screamed. Inside, two creatures, one wild, one human, sat together in the same fragile shelter, surviving side by side. When dawn came, the bear stood, shook off her fur, looked at Mara once more, then stepped out into the wet light of morning and vanished into the trees. Mara stayed seated for a long time, hands still clenched around the bear spray she had never used. She had shared a cabin with a grizzly, and lived. Mara didn't tell anyone for the first 3 days. Not because she was afraid, but because she didn't know how to explain it without sounding delusional. She had shared a night with a grizzly bear in a cabin. Not just survived it, but sat beside it, in silence. in peace. It wasn't a dream. The muddy paw prints were still on the cabin floor. Her sleeping bag still smelled like damp fur and pine. But how do you tell that story and expect someone to believe you? Back in Missoula, she returned to her small house on the edge of town. A garden overgrown with weeds welcomed her like nothing had changed. The neighbors waved politely. Her inbox was full. The world had kept moving. But Mara had not. Something had shifted in her, a kind of stillness she couldn't shake, like part of the forest had followed her home. It started with the scratches. 3 thin, deliberate marks etched into the old wooden post by her back gate. At first, she thought it was a raccoon. Then the paw prints appeared, large, precise, in the soft soil just beyond her garden fence. She stared at them for a long time, half waiting for them to vanish like something imagined. But they were real. Then came the bones, clean, arranged. Not gruesome. Almost ritualistic. A cleaned rabbit's skull left beneath her porch swing one morning, perfectly centered on the welcome mat. A gesture. A token. Not a threat. And in that moment, Mara knew. She remembered. And she had come back. Mara tried to tell a friend, someone she'd known for years, someone who hiked, someone who believed in animal wisdom, whatever that meant. She listened, smiled, tilted her head, and gently asked Mara if she'd spoken to anyone since the divorce. That was the last time Mara brought it up. She began keeping a small logbook tucked beneath the couch cushion. She noted every sound, every time she found new prints, scratches, bones. She drew little sketches of the shapes left in the dirt, the places where bark had been gently scraped off trees. And always in the same direction. Always toward her house. As if the bear were leaving breadcrumbs back to her. One night, Mara couldn't sleep. The wind was strong again, a smaller storm, nothing like the one in the cabin, but enough to rattle the windows. She lit a candle and sat by the glass door, wrapped in a wool blanket. She didn't expect anything, but around 2:14 a.m., the motion light clicked on. She froze. Outside, just at the edge of the garden, she stood, massive, still, a silhouette of memory and muscle outlined in pale light. The grizzly didn't move, didn't make a sound. Mara pressed her palm to the glass. The bear turned her head slightly, not startled, not aggressive, and in that look, Mara felt it again. Recognition. Then, slowly, the bear turned and walked back into the trees. The next morning, Mara found something on the porch. Not bones. Not a threat. A smooth river stone. And scratched into its surface, as if by claw or fang, was a crooked mark, a spiral almost like a fingerprint or a path. She stared at it for minutes, then whispered to herself, "You came back," and felt the tears gather, not from fear but from something she hadn't felt in years. Meaning. The spiral on the stone wouldn't leave Mara's mind. She tried to dismiss it, told herself it was probably just scratches from sliding down a stream or rubbing against rock, but she couldn't ignore the way it had been placed, deliberate, centered, waiting on her porch like a message left in a language older than she understood. The next morning, Mara packed a small bag, just water, a map, and a flashlight. She didn't tell anyone. She hadn't told anyone anything in weeks, not since she realized no one believed her. She left at sunrise, following the back trail that led from her garden to the ridgeline. It was the same route she used to take with her brother years ago. He had loved it, especially in early fall when the leaves began to crisp and the deer paths cut clearly through the brush. Mara walked slowly, watched everything. And after about an hour, she saw the first sign, a pine branch, snapped clean at the end and wedged horizontally between two trunks. It wasn't natural. Something had placed it there. Farther up, she saw more, claw marks, faint but fresh, tracing along bark at shoulder height. Too high for any dog, too low for elk. It was her. The bear. She was leading her. By mid-morning, Mara reached the base of a narrow ravine. It wasn't on any official map, but she remembered it from childhood. They used to call it Whisper Hollow because the wind there always seemed to hush, no matter how strong it was on the ridge. It was quiet now too. Too quiet. Mara crouched near a fallen log, scanned the area. And then she saw it. A low cave opening beneath an overhang, nearly hidden by fern and moss. And just outside, more stones. Not scattered. Arranged. 6 river stones, different shapes and colors, placed in a loose circle. In the center, a small pile of leaves, twigs, and what looked like soft animal fur, grayish-white, delicate. Mara's breath caught. She stepped closer. The circle hadn't been made by accident. It wasn't human. It was instinct, pattern, ritual. She knelt down, gently touched one of the stones. It was warm. Not from sunlight. From proximity. From life. Then she heard it. A rustle from within the cave. A soft grunt. And then, a sound she hadn't heard in years. A sound she'd only ever heard once, when her brother brought home a pair of abandoned fox kits to rehabilitate. A cry. Small. High-pitched. Newborn. Mara's chest tightened. She stepped back just as something moved at the mouth of the cave. The bear. The same Grizzly from the cabin. She appeared without a sound, emerging from the shadows like a ghost wearing flesh. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, nestled against her flank, were 2 cubs. Tiny. Blinking. Wobbly on their legs. Mara froze. The bear didn't growl, didn't posture. She simply stood there, her breathing calm, her gaze locked onto Mara's, not in warning, but in invitation. Mara dropped to her knees. She didn't cry right away. It was too big for tears. Too full of something ancient. The Grizzly had survived that storm. And not just survived, she had lived. She had carried life forward. And somehow, for some reason, she had brought Mara here to witness it. Not to threaten. Not to hide. But to share. As if that night in the cabin had bonded them beyond survival. And this moment, was a return of that trust. Mara sat for over an hour, just watching. The cubs nursed. The mother bear closed her eyes, resting, but alert. And Mara, still and silent, felt something crack open in her. A part of her that had been locked away for years. Since the hospital. Since she held her brother's hand as the monitor flatlined. A part of her that thought she'd never feel life move forward again. But here it was. Right in front of her. And it had 4 paws and a heartbeat. The visits became a rhythm. Each morning, Mara would pack a small bundle, berries, fish scraps, sometimes even boiled eggs, and walk the trail back toward the ravine. She never approached too close. The bear never demanded more. It wasn't dependence. It was something else. Respect. The cubs were growing fast. In just a few weeks, they were bolder, wobbling farther from the den, testing roots with tiny paws, tumbling into each other like softened thunder. Mara named them in silence. Ash and Ember. Not out loud. Only in her journal. Only when she wrote at night by candlelight, retelling the quiet stories of each visit like prayers she didn't want to forget. And she never took photos. Not once. She knew what would happen if she did. Some things are too alive to be captured. But the world had started to notice. It began with boot prints. Mara saw them along the outer trail one afternoon, deep, recent, not hers. She crouched and studied them. Not a hiker's, too wide, heavy-heeled, military-style tread. She didn't panic. Yet. But when she saw the truck parked off the old fire road the next day, engine still warm, tailgate down, something twisted in her chest. That night, she didn't sleep. The next morning, Mara climbed fast. No offerings, no journal, only instinct. When she reached the ravine, the circle of stones was undisturbed, the cave mouth dark and quiet. She waited, breath caught in the space between hope and dread. And then she heard it. Not a growl. Not the cubs' voices. Male. 2 of them. And then, a sound that shattered everything. A gunshot. Mara didn't think. She ran, heart pounding. She tore through branches, ducked low, scrambled across the moss-slick stones toward the clearing near the cave. And there they were. 2 men in camo, rifles slung over their backs, standing outside the den. One was laughing. The other was reloading. Mara stepped into the open without thinking. "Get out of here," she shouted. They spun. One raised his rifle halfway, confused. "What the hell?" "She's got cubs in there," Mara said, her voice shaking. "You fire again, and she'll defend them. You'll both be dead." The first man hesitated. The second, younger, looked uncertain. "Lady, we're within rights. She's untagged." "We didn't know." "You knew exactly," Mara snapped. "You tracked her here. You baited her." Then, from behind them, the brush moved. The Grizzly emerged. Her eyes were calm, her shoulders low, but her teeth were bared, just enough to speak warning. Mara stepped forward, arms wide. "Go," she whispered. "No." The younger man backed up. The older one looked at the bear. Then at Mara. Then back again. And something in him folded. He lowered his gun, spat at the ground, then walked. The younger followed. Mara stood there, alone, heart racing. The Grizzly never came closer. She watched, waited, then slowly turned back toward the cave. Mara collapsed to her knees. Not from fear. From something else. A realization. She wasn't protecting the bear. The bear had been trusting her to protect something more, her legacy. Her children. And for the first time since her brother's funeral, Mara felt purpose. Not as a burden. But as a gift. That night, she didn't light a candle. She sat in darkness and wrote one line in her journal. "She gave me her silence, and I gave her my voice." The Rangers arrived the next morning. 2 vehicles. 4 people. Badges and clipped voices. They found Mara tending her garden, as if it were just another Thursday morning. The woman who had once sat in silence with a wild grizzly now held pruning shears and wore mud-streaked gloves. But her heart was already pounding. "We received a report of gunfire near Whisper Hollow," one of them said. "You familiar with that area?" Mara met his eyes. "Yes." "You were up there?" She nodded. They asked questions. How long had she been going there? Had she seen any bears? Had she been feeding them? Was she aware that interfering with wildlife, especially grizzlies, was a federal offense? Mara's answers were measured, careful. But one thing was clear. They knew something. Maybe the hunters had reported her. Maybe someone else had seen the same prints. Maybe it was just too big to stay hidden forever. That night, she sat on the floor of her cabin, journal open. She knew the next step. And she hated it. There was only one person she could call. Dr. Henry Voss. 10 years ago, he had been the head of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where Mara volunteered part-time while finishing her degree in animal behavior. That was before her brother got sick. Before she quit everything. Before she disappeared into grief and silence. Dr. Voss hadn't heard from her in years. But he answered on the second ring. Mara. His voice cracked with surprise. She took a breath. I need help. The next day, he drove 6 hours to see her. They walked the trail together. Not all the way, just to the edge of the ridge. She told him everything. Not just about the storm and the night in the cabin. Not just about the cubs. But about what happened after her brother died. How she had isolated. How she had almost disappeared herself. And how one silent night beside a wild animal had done what therapy and pills and well-meaning friends couldn't. Made her feel alive again. Dr. Voss didn't speak for a long time. Then he said something she didn't expect. You documented it? Mara hesitated. And then nodded. She showed him the journals, the sketches, the maps, the spiral stone, the circle of rocks. He turned each page slowly, his scientist's mind working, but his eyes weren't calculating, they were soft. This is real, he said. Do you know what you've done? I didn't do anything, she replied. She chose me. Within a week, Dr. Voss contacted his former colleagues. He submitted Mara's logs as an informal case study, no names, no coordinates, just a phenomenon. The reappearance of a previously untagged female grizzly demonstrating consistent, non-aggressive interaction with a single human observer across multiple seasons, including while raising cubs. The response was cautious. Skeptical. But something about the precision of her notes and the emotional tone behind them got through. One field officer requested a meeting. Then another. Eventually, the rangers came back. But this time, they didn't bring questions. They brought tags. Temporary, non-invasive. Not to track her for capture but to create a corridor of protection. Because of Mara's data, the area around Whisper Hollow was declared a non-disturbance zone temporarily at first, then permanently after one of the cubs was spotted on camera 2 months later. The story didn't go public. Mara didn't want it to. No viral headlines. No interviews. But among those who understood, the scientists, the rangers, the ones who lived between maps and forests, her name became legend. They called it the Hollow Pact. And none of them ever asked to see her notes again. They knew they weren't written for them. They were written for the bear. The snow came earlier than expected. By mid-October, the air had changed, crisper. The clouds hung lower, heavier. Mara had planned to make one final trip to Whisper Hollow before the passes closed for winter. Just one more visit. One more chance to leave something near the cave. She hadn't seen the bear in 2 weeks, but she felt her. Always. Just beyond the edge of vision. Like breath on glass. That morning, Mara packed only what she needed: dried food, gloves, her thick red parka. A simple tin of smoked fish, the kind she knew they liked. She left a note on her kitchen table just in case. Back before dark. Trail east. She didn't bring her phone. The hike-in was peaceful. The trees stood silent beneath a silver sky. No wind. No birdsong. Just the muted crunch of frost beneath her boots. It felt almost sacred, the kind of quiet that demands reverence. She reached the ravine just after noon. The cave looked untouched, but the stone circle had changed. 2 of the rocks were gone. In their place were twigs, arranged like a small fence or a barrier. She didn't understand it right away. Only later would she realize what the bear was trying to say. The first flake fell around 1:30. Then another. Within 30 minutes, the trail was nearly invisible. The wind howled over the ridge, hard and cold and sudden. Too sudden. Mara turned back fast, pulled her hood tight, fought her way down the path. But the snow thickened. The sky went white. And soon, she couldn't tell where the trail ended and the woods began. She wasn't far from the hollow, maybe a half-mile. But the forest no longer looked familiar. It looked like another world. By late afternoon, Mara couldn't feel her fingers. She'd fallen once. Maybe twice. Her breath was coming shorter now. She was shivering hard, vision blurring. She found a fallen tree wedged beneath a rock outcrop and crawled beneath it. Not a shelter. Not safe. But something. Her body curled against the cold, her thoughts slowed. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Not like this." Then, a sound. Soft. Steady. Heavy footsteps. Not boots. Pause. Mara opened her eyes. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks. But no. There, through the wall of snow, a shape moved. Massive. Fluid. A bear. Her. The grizzly stepped forward, slow and steady, until she stood just feet away. Her eyes were not wild. They were watchful. And then she did something Mara would never forget. She lowered herself. Curled beside her. Not touching, but close enough that Mara could feel the heat of her body. The same way she had done in that cabin all those months ago. Only now, the roles had reversed. Mara didn't speak. She couldn't. But her tears came anyway, hot, fast, soundless. She lay there, pressed against a tree, with the wind screaming through the pines and a wild bear at her side, guarding her like a silent oath. And slowly, sleep came. Not from exhaustion. From safety. When she woke, it was morning. The storm had passed. The snow was deep, but the trail was visible now. And beside it, paw prints, leading away. She never saw the bear leave. But she knew. She had kept her warm. She stayed through the night, watched the darkness for her, and in that moment, Mara understood. That night in the cabin had not been chance. It had been a beginning. She followed the tracks back home, slow and aching, and when she stepped through her own door, she whispered into the silence, "You remembered." Spring came slow that year. The snow took its time melting from the ridge. The streams ran high and clear, cutting through the stone with a fierce rhythm. Trees budded later than usual. It was mid-May before Mara finally returned to Whisper Hollow. She hadn't seen the grizzly since that storm, but she'd felt her everywhere, in the silence between waking and sleep, in the way the wind moved through her window at night, in the small stone she still kept on her kitchen shelf, the one with the spiral scratched into its side. She didn't know what she would find this time, but she knew she needed to go. One last time. The trail was dry. The ravine smelled like thawing earth and pine needles. She moved slowly, not out of fear but respect, like entering a place that remembered her. When she reached the cave, she stopped. The circle of stones was gone. In its place, something new, a pile of smooth river rocks stacked in a careful tower. Balanced. Deliberate. And next to it, half hidden beneath a patch of moss, a wooden object. Mara knelt, brushed the moss aside. Her hands trembled. It was the lid of a weathered box. She opened it. Inside, a small bundle of fur, soft, clean, gray, carefully tied with a pine needle. Beneath it, a piece of birch bark, curled at the edges. And on it, a mark. A single curved line. A spiral. Drawn not with a pen but with a claw. Mara didn't cry at first. She held the box in her lap, sat beside the stones, and looked out over the forest. Everything was alive. Everything was still. And in that stillness, she felt the presence again. Not near. But not gone, either. Just carried forward. Ash and Ember, the cubs she'd watched nurse beneath the trees, had been seen on trail cams now. Larger. Stronger. Moving with confidence. Rangers had logged multiple sightings. Always together. Always near Whisper Hollow. But never near people. Never again near her. And Mara understood. That had been the promise. To come back once more. To share something final. To say goodbye without speaking it. She placed the box back beneath the stone tower, added one more rock to the stack, then stood. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because some goodbyes don't mean the end. They mean it worked. Back at home, she wrote one last line in her journal. I gave her shelter once. She gave me everything else. A year later, a ranger would find the stone tower again. He'd notice the spiral scratched into the birch bark. He'd file it as natural markings and move on. But the forest would remember. And so would Mara. Because the Grizzly had returned. Not just to survive. But to say thank you. If this story touched you, remember, sometimes the quietest bonds are the ones that change us the most. And trust, real trust, doesn't need language. It just needs presence. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who still believes in the quiet beauty of the wild. Because she wasn't just a bear.